Hello, everybody. So, this is for sure like a different kind of video. I mean, it's another one of my music ones. And I know it's been a minute. I am sorry. I mean, I recorded a lot of this before, but I wanted to go ahead and re-record it anyway. But I had school just kind of kick my ass the last month. So, I don't know, I've been lacking on uploads and I hate that, and I'm sorry guys, but I am recording another game for a game analysis, and I've also started writing another music analysis script that I wanted to do. But here today we're going to be doing Section 80, which is honestly to me Kendrick's most misunderstood album, but I feel like it's so pivotal in understanding the rest of his. Because if there's one artist where I genuinely eventually want to cover each album, it would probably be Kendrick Lamar. Because as much as I do like a lot of Kanye concept albums, I feel like Kendrick's are so intertwined together and cover such grand subjects. I feel like I want to start from the beginning and go in order as they follow. I'm a newer fan of Kendrick Lamar, to be honest with you. And it's not just because of the rap beef, it's just he's always been someone I've thought about listening to because I do love concept albums. I was really big into the Black Parade whenever I was in high school. I mean, I still am. I still love that album so much. But I love concept albums, and I just didn't know that his albums were like that. I never really given him a chance because I always thought like, oh, I always heard how great, his albums like To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn are, which is completely warranted. But for me, I was like, oh, he must have been overrated. But in reality, I mean, To Pimp a Butterfly, at least, is an amazing album. It's probably my favorite of all time now. But soon, I'm thinking I might get to those. But Section 80, I feel like doesn't get brought up much. And even though it's Kendrick's debut studio album, it still shows so much of the talent Kendrick has while giving a loose story to follow. Before I start, please know what I think is not the only correct thing and, may not be right to some people. Though it's the meanings I've taken from the songs and the story I put together in my head through each. I wanted to make a more accessible way to follow the story instead of just reading Genius, because I mean that shit just gets boring. And yes, Genius is definitely a very good source. It just gets hard to read through and just monotonous. But here I feel like I can kind of delve into it and make it a lot more accessible. But now we can start talking about the album. The standard premise Kendrick Lamar discusses is what it's like being someone from his generation, specifically during the Ronald Reagan era. During this time, the crack epidemic was a huge issue in America, and specifically in impoverished areas. The war on drugs was an idea of the Reagan administration to attempt to combat this, but in turn, it also hurt the lives of so many people. The story throughout loosely follows Tammy and Keisha, who are women growing up in this time period. The way I'm going to help build the story is through dividing it into 4 sections. But first, I am going to go through one extra song. The Heart Part 1 is actually the single that came out before the album. The Heart series itself is something that gets in addition each studio album that Kendrick makes, at least as of now. There are currently 6 parts, and each one has aspects that could be similar to the narrative of the album. As with The Heart Part 1, you can definitely see the aspects. He immediately starts getting off the idea that he's a young rapper from Compton who wants to help his culture in and outside of his city. He talks about as he's even writing lyrics for the song that so much stress flows through and out of them. He's already telling how he's clearly been in an extremely tough situation as a young kid that would even be terrible as an adult. There's also a line he references trying to be in XXL, a popular rap magazine, after J. Cole didn't show up, and he was laughed out of the shoot. Though despite this, he continues to want to elevate his skills. It's a line that has a look into the industry, which is also delved into within this album. The Heart Part 1 already sets that idea of giving these different aspects that get even more expanded upon during Section 80 itself. And the other thing is, I feel like each art part seems to come full circle at the end, at least in my opinion. I feel like each one, while yes, they delve into their specific albums, when you put them next to each other, you see how they build this kind of complete progression, and it's just a really interesting thing to me. But anyways, now we can go into the actual songs of Section 80.
We stand on our neighborhood corner. Know that this fire that's burning represents the passion you have. Listen.
The verse section is Her Vices and Evils. Your Ethnicity is the first song, and it starts off with a group leader of sorts calling people to open up about their stories. And the first people who are introduced are Keisha and Tammy. So clearly to me this introduces the idea of where the stories are coming from, but also that Kendrick is acting as this narrator through the story. And this song immediately jumps into what it's about, and that's uniting the group. He immediately starts with the lyrics such as, he wants to break down these walls of race and emphasize that anyone could relate to these stories despite their race. Then the first verse clearly keeps showing the ideas that Kendrick is going to be the narrator of the story and how he has so much to tell us about. He even has a reference to a song later in the album, High Power, but we'll get to it when we do. There's even these instances that are mainly expressing how Kendrick is different from others in the rap game, which this album makes pretty evident. He wants to be someone in the culture who can combine the ideas of someone like an MLK and Malcolm X into one. And as we've seen with hindsight, he definitely has made conversation with each person's ideas. He wants to combat against those who oppress him, but he also wants to try to make them understand why it's wrong and fix the problems that are going on in his culture. And this gets built onto later in his albums, definitely. It ends up being something I feel like beats him down internally. But anyways, this is essentially the introduction track of the album, and also to Kendrick Lamar's studio album debut. Hold Up is a song where Kendrick literally talks about him flirting with a stewardess on a plane and how he eventually sleeps with her. It's a track that mostly exists outside of the album's story, but still gives us a sight into Kendrick's world. The idea of casual sex comes back later on in Kendrick's discography, as he has a mental fight with it. But for now it is shown to be something he kind of brags about, while also acknowledging he's only made a dent in the rap game at this time. It also is another song where he says something that relates to him being older or wiser than his age presents.
I lived my 20s at 2 years old, the wiser man. Truth be told, I'm like 87.
To me, it reminds me a lot of a later track in his discography, which I may go over soon, which is Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. And it's a song that exists outside of the story of Good Kid, Mad City, but gives us an insight into Kendrick's mind during the creation of that album. ADHD seems to be the most popular song on the album, and is yet another one delving into the environment and time period Kendrick grew up in. It's kind of like a cloud rap song, which you don't really get a lot of from Kendrick. It immediately starts with the hook of, which already starts with how in this time so much of the youth are diagnosed with mental health problems such as ADHD, which is even more evident now. It has the girl telling Kendrick plainly that they're crack babies, and it also ends with the line, which delves into how now it seems younger age groups get into partying and drugs, which causes them to miss out on a true youth experience. But what it starts delving into is how his generation has had to deal with so much pain in general, but especially in the American society they live in. The idea that they grow up in these very rough places and were born during the war on drugs and the crack epidemic. He also has lines where he references 808, which references how much of the youth doesn't want to pay attention to the real issues. They just fall into wanting the lifestyle of certain rappers pushed during the bling era, which Kendrick seems to disagree with here. One big figure that seems to be mentioned in a few Kendrick albums was the first African American United States President, Barack Obama. He seems to have conflicted feelings toward him and describes how he makes him and the culture feel convoluted. While yes, it's an African American in power, he still is a politician, which causes a loss of touch with the exact community he portrays to champion. If they get fucked over, he's not going to have to deal with those problems. It's a very deep conversation to be had. And also there's the fact that Kendrick realizes the girl he's talking to has ADHD, which has been such a heavy subject of the song. It keeps delving into how the youth has drugs thrown at them, while also simultaneously being ruined by drugs due to being born during the crack epidemic. ADHD is a true defining song on this album, and it was definitely a sign for things to come, in my opinion. I mean, it's probably the most... It deserves to be the most popular song on this album, and it really helps you to understand, okay, this guy is different, even from this early on.
I love the way you put it on your eyes.
No Makeup, Her Vice, is the song I'm probably the most conflicted about. It's one of the first appearances of Keisha in Kendrick's discography. The main basis of this song is discussing how women don't need makeup to be sexy, really just a personality. Which I think is an empowering message, but it definitely can be misconstrued into pushing naturalistic ideas that makeup is some horrible thing, which I completely disagree with. I think the main thing I agree with is that they don't have, like, a woman doesn't have to change themselves for a man, but I think the idea that, oh, if you wear makeup, it's some bad thing is just crazy. I just disagree with that. But here we have a song discussing this idea through the beginning story of Keisha. It describes how Keisha feels conflicted as if she can only be pretty with makeup, while Kendrick and Colin voices that she doesn't need it. That either way, she is beautiful. There's also a foreshadowing line,
It's the beauty in me, but what he don't see is that I had a black eye.
To be continued.
which I'll get to later, but it foreshadows the later part in the album, Keisha's song. Again, I think this song has a good message. It just can seem preachy, and to me wasn't the best way to do it, but story-wise, it is some great storytelling from Kendrick, and like I said, it gives us a true basis of who Keisha is. After Keisha's introduction, we get Tammy's song, Her Evils, introducing Tammy. The basis of the song is this whole idea that Tammy and her friend are faithful to their boyfriends until they get cheated on. So then they get with each other instead, with the constant hook of representing how they were loyal, and it eventually turns into her partner shows more and more signs, and her trust slips all the way until she eventually leaves him for her friend. It's definitely a song showing the gradual degradation of a relationship and what could happen in a case like this. Even someone who was extremely loyal can get cheated on, and it changes their entire perspective. These last two songs really help build the loose story concepts of the album. We've had songs that build the environment of Section 80, give us an insight into Kendrick's thinking, and storytelling of two girls from the same environment. His vices and evils. Chapter 6 starts with a skit just like from the first track of the album. It also kind of acts as an introduction to the next song, Ronald Reagan Era. I'm going to show a short part of it, but the repeated chorus of is Kendrick pushing that idea even more of not agreeing with the way a lot of youth feels they should act due to what the media pushed at the time. This lifestyle of recklessly indulging in everything leads to worse conditions later on and the problems he's seen growing up. Having a good time isn't a problem, it's the not knowing when to stop. And once that good time becomes your whole life, it can seriously hurt you and those around you. At the time, and even still now, these ways of acting are pushed in the media and can seriously affect younger generations. And something in the modern day, it really already starts showing Kendrick disdain for is that idea of what Drake is like, which I don't really want to get into here. I'd want to get into it in a video way down the road. But I'm saying even here, you can start seeing those seeds being planted of the things he disagrees with in the industry and how someone like a Drake embodies that. Though the in-between narration of the track says,
There's an even more important topic I'd like to discuss. The dysfunctional bastards of the Ronald Reagan era.
which has Kendrick starting to introduce the idea that the Ronald Reagan era is what have impacted the lives of his community so badly, which leads into the next song.
We're far from good, not good from far, 90 miles per hour down Compton Boulevard.
The song immediately starts with these lyrics.
We don't give a fuck, drink my 40 ounce of freedom while I roll my blunt, cause the kids just ain't alright.
Which literally is the exact ideas Kendrick was discussing in chapter 6, the youth being overly reckless. It also describes the ideas of the impoverished communities partially being caused by the Ronald Reagan presidency.
Welcome to Vigilante 80, so don't you ask me.
It's that whole idea that higher-ups having lower taxes in a way caused a community such as his to become impoverished, and this throws the kids from the generation into a dumpster fire of sinister realities, which we can see in the chorus when it says,
Compton crib niggas ain't none to fuck with. Compton Pyrus ain't none to fuck with. Compton essays ain't none to fuck with. But they fuck with me, and bitch, I love it.
expressing how they have to deal with living around gang culture in the places they've been unfortunately pushed in. There's also a refrain where it says,
When you fight, don't fight fair, cause you'll never win. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which tells about how the best way to get out of the hood might be to fight as unfair as it does, as most people born there don't want to end up in the lifestyles they see every day but are forced to deal with it. This honestly became amazing foreshadowing for his next album, but hopefully one day we can get there. But also this song shows the evils of men growing up in this post-Ronald Reagan era society. They are thrown into impoverished living situations with scary realities all around them, and many may even lack that older male figure that they could have to try to make them better, and they end up with figures that lead them to be more entrenched in this situation. Poe Man's Dreams, His Vice, is another song discussing a possible downfall of men growing up in Compton. Lyrics like,
Since my uncles was institutionalized, my intuition has said I was suited for family size.
show Kendrick talking about the realities he's seen in Compton and what he could have possibly fallen into living around so much violence and negative situations. Also, it talks about the different ways society has failed his area and in turn has caused this as well. We can also start seeing some of Kendrick's savior complex when he says,
So determined to blow that you hear the music I wrote, hope it gets you off death row.
we get a lot more of it in his later discography, but even here we have a sign of it. But there's also the religious elements of the song where it says,
Church is definitely on the move, and now we took it up to the cathedral, cause the ism is in
which is again something else he delves into. Similar to Kanye, he has GLC, who is also on Spaceship by Kanye, which is crazy to think about, and he discusses how these problems that they face could be overcome through religion and working on oneself, to push against what society seems to want to force his impoverished community into. So while this song can sound bleak, at the same time, it does give that sliver of hope. The Spiteful Chant is a really short stint before the next interlude. It's just Kendrick and his former black hippie group members saying how they've started going big, as this time he had finally started seeing the billboard. He's making it and won't be put down. His and Her Pain. Now the Campfire skit, Chapter 10, is next, and it's a great follow-up. The group has been being told about what has led to their realities, and different members have discussed their problems. Though now, the group leader wants them to discuss their pain.
This is your generation. Show your pain.
Which leads great into the next few songs. Keisha's song, Her Pain. This story is also followed up with in Good Kid, Mad City, but here it's a true discussion of the pain prostitutes have to deal with. This song was actually from Kendrick to his sister, trying to make sure she was dismayed from becoming one herself. While the other songs for Keisha or Tammy were called Her Vice and Her Evils, here it's true pain. It's an even worse reality. Verse 1 is a stint discussing how Keisha had become a prostitute and now is doing it to make money.
Rosa Parks never a factor when she making ends meet.
This is already a piece of vivid imagery to really make you see the bad reality of it. And then verse 2 has Keisha wanting to avoid being caught by law enforcement, but then she is. The even scarier part, though, is that he says he'll let her be free if she does him a favor. The constant ending of verses of really elevate how much anguish she's in. But again, it seems from every angle she hates this, but she's so deep in it. Verse 3 is one of the darkest verses on the whole album, as Keisha becoming even more numb to this reality, but then we start hearing her backstory. We hear about her mom's boyfriend giving her candy, which was most likely drugs, and then doing stuff with her when she was a child. That is extremely dark, but it's saying that awful experience in this case led her to this sad end.
You can blame it on the mother for letting her boyfriend slide candy under her cover. 10 months before she was 10, he moved in and that's when he touched her.
And after that trauma is revealed, we get to the end of the verse.
Nothing really matters, still she hit the backseat, then caught a knife inside the bladder, left her dead raped in the street.
She has a bad client and her life is taken. Kendrick does very well with storytelling, and this is just the start, and he only gets better from here in each album. But something done so well is how much detail and time is given in each verse, delving into Keisha's situation. But then when her death comes, it's extremely abrupt. It makes you feel like no matter what, even if you have all this in-depth thing about you, your life can be taken at any moment, especially in a reality such as this, and then it's just all over. It's a storytelling masterclass, and it's the dark end of Keisha's story in the album.
Alright, here we go, third take.
Rigamortus is kind of a short aside song just for Kendrick to push how he's taking over the rap game, and it doesn't have much to really do with the story of the album, but more of just his rise to stardom. I also do find it weird that after a song that really talked about death of a person in his story, he has a song named Rigamortus, which is what follows death. Anyways though, he lets the competition know he's coming, and at this time he was already showing his amazing rapping skills. It's crazy to see where it's led today, to say the least, to be honest. It's kind of a foreshadowing to his Control verse years down the line. But here it's already showing just how great he is at this. Each time the chorus comes, it more and more pushes just how much he is above everyone else. Again, this is kind of outside the album's story, but still it's a top tier Kendrick Lamar track. Pushing Corinthians, His Pain, seems to be the conflicted state of men, or Kendrick in this case, with religion. He believes in it, but engages with it while he is also engaging in a vice. The first verse has a lot of him wondering what will happen when he dies, as it says,
I wonder when I die, will he give me receipts? I wonder with the eyes of the Lord, look at me.
It shows his conflicted state of what he thinks he knows about death and what he isn't sure about, which again comes back in Good Kid, Mad City. Verse 2 is a lot more about conflicting within yourself and human nature. It's like the ego versus superego. You know what's right and wrong, while the other part of yourself just wants to get what it wants. Kendrick delves into that well here with lines like,
but why must we retaliate? Is it human nature? I don't know. I look for the answers later.
Verse 3 finally has Kendrick delving more into his religion, but coming to the conclusion that while yes, the kids from Section 80 have engaged in bad things, and some have grown up to live awful lives, he says it's not their fault. It's partially the fault of the generation and area they were born in. They didn't know they would be impoverished or targeted by the system. They were innocent bystanders, grown up into it due to a lack of parenting or care from the area they grew up in, or in a lack of care from the government they grew up under. It's to me the point Kendrick in the story starts fully taking that role of being a speaker from his area, but he isn't quite up to wanting to lead it yet. He's part of the culture though, and here he delves into that. Cushing Corinthians is a solid song that really helps you see where Kendrick comes from, especially this early in his career. Kendrick's exposition. Blow My High, Members Only is a song that Kendrick actually made in honor of a fellow artist, Aaliyah. The verse comes in saying,
I can fuck with y'all.
Bitches all up in my business.
I can fuck with y'all.
Industry of counterfeits.
I can fuck with y'all.
which already shows how Kendrick doesn't want to get caught up in the music industry. He wants to dodge and engaging with the fake weirdos in the industry, which again, like I said, comes back later. It's another song where Kendrick is talking about his general hold over the rap game, but also he is realizing how fake some people are, also saying,
A to the L-I-Y, A-H, give it up 2 times, they give it right back, don't blow my high.
which references Aaliyah as said before. The second verse also delves in discussing how real other rappers may or may not be. It's just a solid song that's a tribute to an artist Kendrick admired, but also shows his insight into the rap game and those around him that were coming up at the time. Ab-Soul's outro is truly like a last call. It's Kendrick just flat out saying what the album was about with lines like,
Bigger picture isn't developed yet. Like, what if Keisha was celibate? Or what if Tammy came across a real man who didn't play games like children? My nigga cheated.
and also saying how it's just his opinion. It's the listener's decision whether they believe or act on anything he has said. He delved into so many ideas of religion, politics, society in general, and what he believed made his generation.
If you don't leave with nothing else tonight, you will leave with knowing yourself. You will leave knowing that you represent something that's bigger than all of us.
What made his home of Compton. This song lays it all out and acts as a great full outro of the loose concept of Section 80 in general. A character like Keisha's story is concluded, while Kendrick's continues through the evils, vices, and pains he's dealt with. And that's for anyone in Section 80. A character like Tammy still lives on, but throughout it he covers all these different stories that could happen from this area, but here he expresses that all at once.
Everybody put 3 fingers in the air. The sky's falling, the wind is calling, stand for something or die in the morning. Section 80, high power.
Finally, High Power is the final song on the album, and honestly my favorite. It was produced by J. Cole, funnily enough. It has the narrator from before giving his final speech before the beat starts. As an entire song that really encapsulate what Kendrick Lamar would continue to delve into, just at an earlier time in life. He still has a masterclass here, but we know where his career goes. He covers different activists and how people should listen to them with lines like,
Huey Newton going stupid, you can't resist his high power.
but the biggest ideas presented across the album is self-reflection and pushing yourself to find enlightenment despite your harsh upbringing with lines like,
So get up off that slave ship, build your own pyramids, write your own hieroglyphs.
pretty much saying how even though the system screwed his home of Compton, the people from there can still succeed. Is again yet another thing I feel like foreshadows what is probably my favorite album of all time, which he also made. They can still become amazing people in society and do extraordinary things despite what the system and society try to lead them to believe. The statement, high power, itself demonstrates that, with also the second half of it being po we are, which can mean poor we are, which delves into that whole impoverished home of Section 80 he came from. Though in spite of this, people from his hometown could be successful and make things better, and that's exactly what he's doing now. Section 80 is an amazing album and has great story elements. Though this album definitely has the most loose story of any of his albums, as most of them literally have a story that goes through each song, here has more of small stories that are within the environment he discusses in the album. The story is more of the external environment instead of the stories internally within Kendrick, and also helps build this Mad City environment that is expanded on in the following album. While I guess they're important, they wouldn't have came to be if it wasn't for what Kendrick sees as the unfair treatment during Reaganomics, which led to the youth from Compton being failed. Tammy's story is her being let down by someone because he probably had a bad upbringing. Keisha's story has her being violated as a child due to the awful living situation she grew up in, which leads to her eventual death. And Kendrick's story had him dealing with the vices around Compton. He had to deal with seeing gang violence, drugs being pushed at him, and more. It's all these stories being woven into the greater story of a failed area of California. Though despite the mistreatment of it, he finds hope in wanting to become the voice of this place, or at least enlighten the world of the issues. But also prove that great things can still come from his home, and that this place isn't failed. It's not what the media portrays. It's not like if you grow up here it's immediately bad and it's the worst place you could ever live. What I mean is that it was a place that society made it harder for them to live through. But what he shows is that anyone can still rise from it to become something special, and as we can see today, he has done that. But now, we've finished Kendrick Lamar's studio album, Section 80. Again, I know this is his only album that's a loose concept, but it still has a great storytelling that deserved an analysis. It's a wonderful album that really helps you get an insight into Kendrick and where he came from. And off the bat, it shows his techniques he would come to perfect today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Colton, thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe.